Hello and welcome to the Game Dev London podcast, a community of amazing people who love talking about and sharing their love of the details behind making games, whether or not they're actually based in London. I'm Oscar Clark, he, him pronouns, and I'm on a quest to understand everything you wanted to know about game dev, but never dared to ask. And today I am delighted to be joined by Dima. Dima from Drop tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do, and what makes you interested in the world of games?
Hey Oscar, great to be here. Yes, indeed. I actually was in London 5 months ago, but now I moved to LA, so no complaints about the weather. Gonna
Yes,
skip
yeah,
that part.
good timing,
Uh,
I think. It's very
yeah,
cold here right
perfect
now.
timing for the winter. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, my background is like the first 10 years of my professional career is boring. I was an investment banker and I was working in venture capital funds. So financial stuff, boring stuff. But in 2018, I launched an esports organization and it was super fun, but we ran out of funding pretty fast. And I started looking for ways to help the team that we were managing to actually make money and continue doing what they love doing is basically play competitively and make money for that. And
Yeah.
that's when, together with a partner of mine, we launched a platform, which at the time was called organization.gg, where we basically connected pro gamers and influencers with their community members in live interactive experiences on Twitch. So, in simple words, the viewers would be able to play games together with their favorite streamers and pro gamers, and everyone would get a free ticket. But if they donated, they would have more tickets and more chances to be randomly selected into
But
the
I
team.
think what this hints at, and we'll get into some of the other areas that you've been doing more recently in a bit, but what this hints at is that you've been sitting there in this space where you've got this pro gamer scene, this esports scene, connecting with influencers all around the kind of periphery of games. So here I am. I'm sitting here as a game developer, and although technically I was one of the earliest sponsors of esports back in like '98, back
Well,
in the day, yeah. Well, my first. Just a quick tangent. My first ever event in games, on my first day on the job,
mhm.
a colleague of mine, James Kay, was running an event called Quakedelica. This was the very first ever UK games, Quake event, and he managed to get Thresh over. Now, you may not know who Thresh is. Those people in the room might, not know this ancient history. But once upon a time, uh, d- um,
Mhm.
um, uh, John Carmack basically put up his Ferrari, and Thresh beat him at Quake. And
Ooh.
so that's how far back we go. Anyway, the point being is that we've been looking at this principle of esports for a very long time. It's matured
Mhm.
considerably, as you're describing. But I think what you seem to hint to me is this need to understand the relationship between the game, the players of the game, the highest peak, the aspirational players, the esports players, and the community. Is that fair?
That is fair. Yes. But then this is actually one of the reasons why we actually had to pivot is because when players reach the highest level of skill set in the game, then it becomes super not interesting and actually super irritating to play with someone else whose level is much lower.
Hmm, hmm, hmm.
So you kind of like create this elite group of people who are super fond of your game, so who are super good at it, and I guess it's beneficial. Like it's the dream of any game to have this kind of group of people, but then you have to treat them as a separate
Well,
group and
you kind of create a bit of a monster. I don't mean that in a kind of negative way about the
Mhm.
individuals. I'm just talking about kind of like the principle. In fact, the Thresh example is a really good case of this, where shows how long it's been happening. Where you've got a situation where Thresh comes in, the person who's just gone through all of the UK regional play sessions, online play, and in person and cafe play. That we have an event in the Ministry of Sound. The person basically beats all the seven other people who are the finalists. He goes to play Thresh and loses 57 to -1. I mean, it was a trouncing, an absolute trouncing. And this was the finest player the UK could find at the time. I mean, there's arguments about that. Let's not get into that. But the point being, that you, as you say, you get to the point where the person who is extremely talented, who gets to spend those 10,000 plus hours of specialization, that natural skill, they become so unplayable with that
Hmm.
it diminishes that engagement, that direct one-to-one play engagement.
Exactly. And that's what happened, and that's what basically pushed us towards you know, pivoting
Hmm.
with the idea that we had. But also, while we were running that platform, we discovered that influencer marketing was one of our most important channels to
Hmm.
actually grow the platform. And we stumbled across a lot of issues while trying to launch these campaigns, trying to set up payments, trying to make sure that influencers are actually sticking to the initial tasks and descriptions that we had. So all
Well,
of that, yeah, yeah.
before we go
Mhm,
too deep into this, I'm as you probably guess, I'm not going to try and paint the wider picture. I mean, let's help people who are listening to this understand what we mean by influencer marketing, because there's a lot of people
mhm,
out there who find some of this sort of marketing aspects of game development. They don't quite get it. They don't feel it's part of development, and it absolutely is, absolutely part of the game process. And I think particularly influencer related. So we're talking about. I mean, I'm, or you tell me what we're talking. Who, in terms of the types of people, who are we talking about? Are we talking about the Mr. Beast, the PewDiePie's, the thing, or are we
mhm.
talking about I'm trying to think of some of the names of some of the people I know, but anyway, there's some of the smaller folks who maybe it's a kid who's just starting up and having a go. What scale are we talking about here?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I don't think there's a universal definition of what an influencer is, like,
Mm,
and what specific like numbers should stand behind the number of followers, for example. But in sort of the way we describe it internally is that anyone who has at least 1,000 followers on any of the social networks, whether it's TikTok, Twitch, YouTube, Instagram, Snap, you name it, and that has an incentive to monetize the engagement with their audience can be called an influencer. So, and again, you mentioned very good examples. So the size of influencers varies a lot. So you can have like nano influencers, someone who
mm,
has those like 1,000 followers, or you can have like macro or like celebrity type of influencers who have tens of millions of followers.
yeah.
And of course, they all require totally different approach and totally different budgets as well when you're trying to partner up or collaborate with them. And I'm happy to touch more on that.
Well, I think one of the interesting ones for me is the way that this relationship has changed over the last, let's say, 10 years. One of the earliest experiences I saw with mobile games using I mean, we've seen influences in PC games for a long time, but I mentioned mobile games because I think it's interesting. People forget that one of the first mobile games that started to really pay attention to influencers was Best Fiends. They did a series of work with PewDiePie, but actually there was a moment even prior to that with a game called Crossy Road,
Hmm.
where basically PewDiePie had talked about the game, so Matt and the team made his dog as one of the avatars in the game.
Hmm.
Now I don't remember, and I could be wrong. I'm sure the hips the not hipster will. Okay, no, not hipster will. Anyway, the team behind the game, brain. I'm getting old. My brain doesn't function properly. The team behind the game got a lot of benefit, a lot of interest, a lot of hype by the very fact that they made a material engagement that was about the relationship as a human level with that particular influencer. And I know
Hmm.
that there's lots of whys and wherefores with the particular individual, but let's not go there. The point was that was some of the earliest experiences where people were paying attention. But that was very much I had to have a way to connect with that individual. I did a lot of the legwork. Well, not me, but people involved had to do a lot of legwork themselves. They had to engage commercially with that individual directly. So there's things like contracts. There's things. I mean, maybe I don't know if people are aware of this, but if you're going to pay someone to do some work to promote your thing, there's a whole bunch of commercial legal aspects of that
Hmm.
you should be paying attention to, at least in theory. And there's lots of people who've gone very badly wrong by doing that badly. But you guys are trying to do something, I think, slightly different from that. And by the way, other platforms do exist. I'm not, but to help the folks out there understand, how do you try to slice that relation? How do you help that ease that engagement with those types of creators?
Hmm. Yeah, so our platform, Job.me, we specifically focus on micro influencers. So those influencers who have 1,000 followers and more, up to like 1,000, 100,000 followers. But maybe before I go into more details there, I just want
Yeah,
to take a step back and I mean, tell about the transition that has been taking place
yeah,
in the
yeah,
industry. Like before, like 5, 10 years ago, everyone would know the celebrity like Instagram or YouTube influencers, and most of the budgets would be directed at them. But I'd
yeah,
say in the last 5 to 7 years, there's been this transition of brands realizing that it just takes a lot of effort and money, and the payouts of those integrations are not always as effective because you might be the 10th brand in line to actually make an integration with a particular influencer,
yeah,
and influencers are just like super spoiled with the money. Um, so there was this transition of switching the focus from running campaigns with like super big, influential, celebrity type of influencers to smaller influencers.
mm,
And now, for over the last 5 to 7 years, this has been like a major trend. Most of the companies are still working with huge celebrity influencers. That's a fact, and that's not going
yeah.
to go anywhere.
But
Um,
that's more like a
but we've,
celebrity endorsement, isn't it? That's more,
yeah.
I mean, you're doing a deal with that person, and I think so. The reason I think it's interesting generally. So my attitude is, if I can find a bunch of micro influencers, like say the 1,000
Mhm.
plus, and actually I find that a lot of success between 1,000 and sort of 10,000 scale individuals, um, I get more of the attention from them, and I find it really amazing how much effort and quality those guys put in, because they're still struggling, they're still pushing, they're still trying, and the more you're generous to them, not just in terms of money, but also engagement and talk to them and
Mhm.
bringing them into your community, I find that's incredibly effective. Because at the end of the day, the thing that keeps people playing a game is the love of the game. You're not going
Yeah.
to get that from a massive celebrity figure, endorsing, "Hey, look at this thing I am now selling you," rather than, "Oh my God, did you see what I just did? This is awesome." That kind of
Mhm.
moment of joy is a personal
Mhm.
thing, and if I can get 10, maybe 100 micro influencers for the, to want to do that, and my budget is the same as it would have been if I'd got a larger influencer to do one slot.
Mhm.
I mean, that to me is
That,
where the economics comes.
that's exactly the point. And sort of it's the way to look at it is you're also not putting all the eggs into one basket. So for example, you paid $10,000 for an integration, but something went not according to the way you planned. That means that, most of your budget is gone. Whereas if you find, let's say, 50 influencers for the same amount of budget, even if like 5 or 10 of them fail, or do something like something that you didn't expect, that you didn't want them to do, I mean, your campaign could be considered successful campaign. And the way we look at the integrations with like large celebrity influencers and smaller micro influencers is based basically on the goal that you're trying to achieve. If you're looking for the eyeballs, if you're looking for the impressions, if you're looking for the awareness, the best way for you to get that would be basically to go and partner up with larger influencers, those who have millions of followers.
And
But
I
if
think,
you're interested
yeah,
in conversions and getting like meaningful results, such as growing your Steam wish list, purchases of your game, getting unique UGC content, everything that's related to the conversions, like in-game engagement, this is where micro influencers do a much better job. And I'd say if you compare like the conversion rates from different campaigns with a large influencer and a micro influencer, they could differ like up to 5 or 10 times the
Yeah.
conversion rate.
Well,
So
let's take a
mhm.
step back on that again because I think it's really interesting, kind of, to remind people of some of the terms you were using there. For those who may or may not be involved in user acquisition, these are the same terms that we use when we're doing paid ads. So things like conversion, things like wish listing, all that kind of stuff. I mean, obviously wish listing everyone does, but understanding the audience and the scale and the interaction, all of these kind of principles are very similar to how we would place an ad in, say, a social platform or something like that. They're not that dissimilar, arguably, between how we track and measure engagement with social posts. So there's a kind of hybrid way of thinking, I think, between understanding how community operates, understanding how paid UA operates, and this, for me, sits somewhere in between the two. Do you think that's something that's understood by, do you think there's, I mean, I know what I think, but you obviously are engaging with lots of different developers. How much do you think people understand the role that think this kind of engagement takes? The skills it takes to make the best of this.
You're talking about influencer marketing in general,
In
just
general, yeah,
about
yeah,
this channel. Yeah.
yeah,
I think most of the PC gamers that we are in touch, I'd say 95% of them do understand the value and the importance of influencer marketing. And
yeah.
I even found us data, like statistics, that almost 98% of all PC games have been either trying to use the influencer marketing as one of the like growth channels or have plans to do so. And with all those changes that are taking place in the advertising industry these days, like with the Apple policy, even the mobile gaming companies are now looking into engaging influencers in promoting the apps. And this is
Mm.
something that wasn't that popular, I'd say even like 3 to 4 years ago, but now we see clients coming with mobile games, which is kind of amazing, which is cool.
Yeah, no, I think I mean, it's a big deal. So I mean, so for full disclosure, that I have used DropeMe, and it's something we've used on a PC game particularly. We have yet to use it on a mobile game, although it's something we're planning to do. And we're actually about to launch one of our PC games on console as well, and we're looking to sort of leverage for that. Now, again, I think what you're hinting at is also really important here, which is that in terms of the workload that an indie or a double A type organization, the bandwidth that we can have to access those audiences, I think 3, 4, maybe even pre-pandemic, I would say that it was quite a feat of effort to make those engagements, to make that operate. And I think post-pandemic, maybe even during pandemic, we started seeing people trying to make that easier, and platforms trying. I mean, I think there's actually a number of platforms trying different alternative ways to find solutions. So, for example, I think a lot of teams are trying to do things like creating specific tasks that you want the influencer to do, to be able to
Hmm.
say you're going to reward that influencer based on specific returns, like signing up to Discord or adding to the wish list. In fact, one particular example, I think I've talked to you about this, I'm not too sure. We had a particular Brazilian influencer who signed up to the process. We weren't specifically marketing in Brazil, and he brought something
Hmm.
like 80 people to the Discord overnight.
Hmm.
And just because he did one session, 80 people turn up. We actually had to add a Brazilian language channel to
Hmm.
the Discord specifically in response to it. Fortunately, the community manager on that particular game happens to be Brazilian, so that was easy.
Ah, that was a
But
match.
but this is the sort of thing I think we didn't expect, even though we'd set up these kind of right parameters. I think one of the things that's different about influencer marketing is that you don't have the certainties of what the outcome's going to be. I think it can surprise you in ways that a traditional kind of paid user acquisition ad program won't surprise you. You either get the result or you don't. I think there's a human element that comes with the influencer, which makes it more, well, not say more interesting, but different in terms of experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And that's in addition to what you mentioned in your previous comment, like you cannot make influencer marketing a completely data oriented tool
Mm.
like you would do with like social media networks, for example. Because at the end of the day, there's always this just human connection. The people who promote your game, who engage in promoting your game, they first of all have to like your game, and most likely they're also going to be interested in the team who is behind creating
Yeah.
the game. Actually, that's one of the first feedback, one of the most popular feedback that we're getting from over 3,000 influencers that we work with is that is there a way for us to communicate directly with the game developers who launch campaigns on your platform? Because we want to share feedback about the game and we want to build long-term relationship with the games that, we liked promoting and we liked playing. And that's something that we're also going to be integrating soon is although we are a performance-based platform, we want to make sure that there are opportunities to build those long-term relationship between the creators and the games or the game developers, because this benefits both sides, the game developers and the micro influencers that are there.
Well,
So yes,
and I'm
there's
going
always going
to
to be this and
let me
yeah,
dive
element
into
of
that because I
interaction.
think that's a massively interesting space. So, for example, in the campaign that we did, and again, like you say, there are other platforms out there, so this is not exclusive, but the amount of joy that we received in the because when you communicate with the person, so you put out here is an event. We had seasonal event on one of our games, a card game. Seasonal event was happening, and we're looking for installs. We're looking for wish list, whatever it was. Um,
Hmm.
and we hand over a key. Now, this particular game was free to play, so the key was a bit of a kind of weird one, but we hand over a key anyway. Um, they got some free currency basically, so they could buy things in the game. And the number of people who reached out and were so grateful to be part of the process, and they wanted feedback on what they'd done, the professionalism, but they were just wanting to talk about the game. And
Hmm.
I found that really fascinating. It wasn't just transact. I mean, there were some who were transactional, but it wasn't just transactional. These are genuinely people who are trying to build up again. Are they influencers or are they just creators? Some people don't like the term influencer. I tend to
Yeah.
prefer creator as the term because that's what
Hmm.
they're doing. They are creating content. They happen to be using our games as the media for the content
Hmm.
they create. There's a background, if you like, but they're adding. It's an additive creative process. So their experience playing is the joy that the audience members are receiving. And I think if we have to step back and remind ourselves that this is a personal thing for them, and
Hmm.
we're facilitating their ability to continue as much as they're facilitating our ability to get exposure. Is that a fair summary?
Oh yeah, for sure. And just to step back from that and give a bit more perspective on what is actually happening in terms of the numbers and amount of
Yeah.
influencers in the market. So there's over 50 million influencers. And by the way, I don't like the term influencer as well. I love creators more, but I just, for some reason, we
I,
just stick with this internally.
it's
So I
become
use
a
this all the
it's
time.
become a measure. I mean, I get it. It's hard. I find myself slipping all the time. Yeah, I'm trying to
Because
force
we
myself to
have
say creator.
Yeah, we because we have also game developers, and I
Mm.
love to call them game creators as well. So it then becomes kind of like confusing because we have
Yeah,
creators on both sides, and it's
yeah,
just difficult to distinguish. So I'll stick with the term influencers for the time being.
yeah.
So there's over 50 million like creators who consider them like influencers who are doing it like almost full time. And if we take Twitch, for example, as one of the channels of influencer marketing. There's over 8 million channels on Twitch. But if you look at the data, like how many partners, like who partners is a term coined by Twitch, those people who have at least um, I think it has to be like over like 500 followers, and they have like special terms that they have to like stream for a certain amount of time. They have
Yeah.
to have like certain audience engagement. So there's only like 0.5% of those partners on Twitch out of 7 million channels. This means there's a tiny group of influencers who are kind of prepared to work with brands and who are constantly being kind of like attacked by the brands. But there's this
Yeah.
long tail of smaller creators, of smaller influencers that are looking for those type of engagements, but
Yeah.
they're constantly being overlooked by brands.
Mm.
And the issue for the brands to be working with them is that they're too small to be reaching out to them individually, because you would need
Yes.
to have like hundreds of those smaller creators to be running campaigns. And
Yeah.
then it becomes a nightmare in terms of the operational processes. Like, how do you actually manage those hundreds of smaller influencers? And this is where you can, yeah, tap into various platforms, and Drop.me is one of the opportunities. There are others on the market, but we're all go like we're not like Drop Me specifically is going under that long tail of smaller creators who also
Yeah.
bring much higher conversions.
Yeah, and like I said, there, we all know there are other people, but it's this mindset that we're doing, which is how can we make the process of engaging with people who are passionate about games as efficient as possible, which benefits the people who are influenced. So if you're a content creator and you're trying to, find ways to keep it yourself going, there are now these commercial routes that you can tap into. And if you're a game provider, you're obviously, game creator, you can find people who will help spread the word. And I think, I mean, let's face it, we are very familiar with the ubiquity of Raid Shadow Legends, for want of a better phrase.
Mm.
So there is a risk there about overexposure, arguably. Although I'm not sure. In fact, I was on a panel with one of the product owners from that team.
Mhm.
They were working on a different game, but same company. And it's interesting when we talk about kind of like that sort of stuff with them. And the bottom line is that actually for them they've been hugely successful as a result of the level of exposure. So much so, the fact that it's almost become a trope in
Mhm.
itself means that they get more benefit than
Mhm.
than anything else. Anyway, I'm digressing. So let's talk back. So what are the kind of tricks of the trade? The things that you think work best when you're trying to engage these sort of larger numbers of smaller um, scale creators.
Mhm. Yeah, I think so. The first step that uh, any game developer should start with is basically ask themselves, what are the goals of the campaign? What are you actually trying to achieve? Whether it's, getting purchases, whether it's getting content, whether it's building up community of the influencers to prepare for the launch. So first of all, you should start from choosing the right goal and understanding what specifically do you want to achieve within that goal. Like set like a certain metrics behind it. If you're looking for a wish list, how many wish lists do you intend on getting? And based out of your goals, then um, basically just set up a plan of the way to engage influencers and their platforms. And of course, you also have to take into account the type of the game that you're building, that you're trying to promote. And it's always very important to find the influencers who are interested in that
Yeah,
particular genre or game. So there has to be an organic match, which is not influenced by the amount of money you're willing to spend on that, but just by the organic interest of an influencer.
and just
Um,
to dive in on that, I think it's important
mhm,
because I've used a number of platforms, and actually it's not that dissimilar to when we're doing social boosts. We're still. I mean, not every platform has the same level of kind of like detail that you can dive into, but we are generally talking about. It's clear what games people are playing because they include that in their profile. You can identify them from that. You can get some assessment, and by the way, you can preset some of these questions, but you don't have to accept everybody. you can essentially reach out and find people and then review. And there are numerous tools out there. I can't remember the names of the tools now. My brain's going. You've got already plugged in the Twitch API that shows people's Twitch levels, their
Hmm.
audience and stuff like that. But there are a whole bunch of tools out there that we can use to identify how active someone is, how engaged their audience is with them, and I
Yeah.
think that assessment, yeah,
So the tools would be like Salignome, for example,
yes,
if you're
Sally,
looking
Sally
for
Gnome, that's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah,
Salignome, or also Twitch tracker. So if
yeah,
you know the genre of the game that you're interested in, like
yeah,
in the influencers who play particular genre, I would recommend just going to Salignome, type in the genre, the games
yeah,
that are similar to yours, and then you'll get like a whole huge list of influencers or Twitch streamers. And if we talk about Salignome, this would be like Twitch streamers
yeah, yeah, yeah,
particularly. You'll get a long list of those. Then you have to find their contact information, which is kind of
yeah.
painful because since most of them are still small influencers, not all of them have emails publicly listed somewhere.
Absolutely.
So it also takes a lot of time, but totally
Well,
doable.
but no, but what I meant was more the case of you could work out from the characteristics of the streamers you like what the characteristics are, and then you can plug that data in your criteria when you're setting up your campaign on one of the platforms. For example, when
Yeah.
I set up my campaign for a Coney Island, which is one of the games we've been publishing, I'm looking
Hmm.
for a cozy game. I'm looking for games like My Time at Porsche. I'm looking for games like there's a bunch of kind of obviously the um, uh, various sort of farming cozy games out there you'll
Hmm.
be very familiar with, and so I use them as my what drives me to find my search criteria when I'm defining who I'm looking for as a streamer, because I know that game has similar qualities to those experiences, and I want to make sure that I get the best benefit by targeting the right people.
Yeah, and that's exactly the right way to do that.
Mm.
I mean, there's manual ways to do that, and I was just trying to describe the steps, but it
Yeah, yeah,
just takes a lot of time, and I
it
guess
does.
it's not really worth it at the end of the day because you have various platforms
Well, we have
that
lots to
can help
do.
you along the way.
We've got games to make. We've
Exactly.
got people to tell to do certain bits of code in certain places and create certain art. There's lots to do in a game developer.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Let the platforms take the boring part of your life and focus on what
yeah,
you're good at, building amazing
yeah.
games. That's why these platforms are created to help you out on those endeavors.
Exactly. And I think this is the sort of thing about working out. I think whenever you're trying to engage an audience, and I think this is what I think the whole content creator audience adds another layer to. We've got to understand who our audience is at the end of the day. We've got to understand who wants this game, why they're going to want to play it, what's going to excite them, what's the thing that's going to grab their attention. But I think what's interesting about the rise of influence over the last 10 years is that we now have to pay attention to our audience's audience. So
Mhm.
it's not just the player. Now the player has an audience, and we want to
Mhm.
get that player's audience to want to play the game as well. And there's lots of history of games out there that were only really playable through once. So when you watch someone else playing it, it didn't have enough compulsion to play. So I suppose where I'm going with this is, how do you know if your game is right to use that kind of influencer marketing? Are there risks involved with that process?
That's a good question. I think any game is right for influence and marketing because at the end of the day, and like you mentioned, this difference between the influencer and the player, it diminishes. It's basically non-existent. The only difference is that a player might not have the followers who follow and watch them, but the influencer would be the same player playing your game and having fun with it, but he would have 100 people watching him or her doing that.
Yeah,
So I think any game is suitable for influencer marketing. Uh, it's yeah, I don't think there are like any limitations.
So
There are some
I
games which are just better suited where you can
yeah
actually play, for example, with your community,
yeah
and it just makes it a bit more fun for influencers to engage their community while playing the game.
mm.
Um, and but all of the games are still suited for
So,
influencer marketing.
so I think you're probably right, but I think that we have to be careful. If we've got a game that's got a short playthrough time, if it's got a linear
Hmm.
story with a start, middle, and end, we run risks where it's essentially too many spoilers. And so, if I already know what happens in the game because an influencer has basically spilled the beans, I think that there is a risk there. So I think, but I don't think that's a reason not to do it. Just for clarity, I
Hmm.
think it's a reason not to make those games. Oh, actually, that's not quite true. It's not. It's not even to not make those games, but to make those games with a eye to the impact you're going to get. Because, frankly, whether you use influencer marketing or not, if your game is good and it is short play and has a linear narrative, someone's going to spoil it pretty quickly. So your
It's
audience is going to be capped anyway.
No matter what you do, there's still going to be walkthroughs of your game if it's a
Yeah,
popular game. There's always going to be someone, writing like the spoilers. So it's inevitable. But it's still content about your game. This is also a promotion about your game. Some
yeah,
people don't like to, they'd rather see a trick or hint how to pass that level and just move forward. And
mm,
obviously there are a lot of these people because otherwise the videos with the walkthroughs wouldn't exist.
yeah.
But again, it's still content. It still helps your game grow. Just with a probably slightly different audience, not the
Okay.
hardcore gamers who are willing to grind and
Yeah.
find all the answers
And
themselves.
maybe not the scale of audience that you might have wanted to happen, but then that's a choice of your design, I would argue, rather than whether you're using the influencer marketing process. That's kind of my take on it. It's an interesting
Yeah.
thing because I think what it says again. I think fundamentally for me, when we're dealing with larger scale people, we're typically, and again, I'm not trying to do any disservice to the individuals because the inevitable thing, like you say, they're being chased by a brand. They're going to have a more transactional element to what they're doing. Whereas I think the opportunity that comes with smaller influences is the chance to bring them alongside you. Um, have you seen kind of any kind of examples of that happening, or is it still a bit too early to see that?
The examples, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, like the number one requested feature is actually like for influencers getting in touch with the gaming companies and start building long-term relationship. And
Hmm.
I've seen a number of cases of game developers finding and engaging influencers on Job.me and then seeing them create amazing content and
Yeah,
just building the relationship outside of the platform.
yeah,
And like having them as their ambassadors and providing like some more game keys
mm,
to these folks. So this is already happening, and the smaller influencers are super willing to engage in those type of relationships because again, as we discussed earlier, they're not spoiled by all the attention that the larger influencers are getting. So they're interested in having those long-term relationships, and most of the time they don't even require like any monetary like side to it. They just like the game, they want to help you out, understand, that these are tough times
mm.
for a lot
Oh
of
yeah.
like indie devs. This is
And
especially so.
we actually had one where one of the influencers that were actually we did several campaigns for the Iconic Island game as it was getting ready for release, and there was one particular influencer who jumped every single time on. They were like
Mhm.
one of the first people to sign up as soon as we updated the next stage, and they then said that they did a key giveaway. They'd just done one for Sandrock, which was released a similar time frame, and would we want to be part of that too? So I chucked them 3 keys. They did a thing. We got lots of positive feedback from the back of that. It's these little moments where this is somebody who just loves cozy games, was
Hmm.
deeply engaged with that, had a reasonable audience, not massive but sufficient to make it interesting. And to me, that was a perfect kind of like combination where we were able to get the benefit of a they were pushing the game generally, and b that they were moving. One thing I do also probably want to
Uh-huh.
state is the quality of some of the material that people put together. I found it quite impressive. So one of the things that we had, I think this was with Iconi as well, was you basically put some material onto. I think it was like put a minute's worth of material onto YouTube, and
Hmm.
the it was basically trailer quality responses. It was like,
Hmm.
and they're doing this talk about, hey guys, this is the game, and we're doing this, and much better than I do. There was a couple of folks with amazing voices that I would have probably wished I could have paid a huge amount of money to get that quality of voice if I was to make that as a trailer. Um, I mean,
You have these amazing like gems
yeah,
sitting just in this long tail of creators
mm,
because it's also super competitive for
yeah,
these smaller guys and they're amazing talents out there. But again, they're just either were overlooked by the algorithm or still not there yet, but they will become the next stars going forward. But yes, they're amazing, talented creators on our platform,
mm,
other platforms. So that's one of the reasons why we're doing that is
mm.
to actually help them grow and continue
Uh,
what they do.
and I think this is something that we as an industry in games absolutely need to encourage, because when we give money to Metas, Googles, etc. of the world, that we have to do that as part of a paid user acquisition process. That's all great, but there's something that happens when we can actually leverage the marketing budgets that we have with audiences that just love games, and I think there's this very positive vibe that comes, particularly I think like you guys are doing, focusing on the smaller influencers. I'm not saying
Hmm.
ignore the bigger ones, but I mean, do you feel like you're getting that kind of sense that game developers want to invest in that audience specifically?
Um, we haven't been that long on the market, so our platform
Yeah.
launched about 7 months ago. So there's not a lot of like these long-term trends that I can
Mm-hmm.
speak about, but 80% of our revenue is actually revenue that's coming from the recurring, from the repeat clients.
Yeah.
So my guess, and from the conversations that I'm having with the clients, is they love the results they're getting and they're coming back
Mm.
with larger budgets. So
Yeah.
my assumption is yes, it's working and
Mm.
it's going to be even bigger than that. Because if you ask any kid right now who's like from 10 to 16, like what are your aspirations in life? What do you want to be? But the majority of them would say, I want to be a creator. I want to
Yeah.
create content. I want to be a YouTuber, TikToker, or
Yeah.
someone involved in the industry. So it's inevitable, and it's only going to grow from
Yeah.
this point on.
I mean,
And
my age
another
group.
thing that
Yeah.
that that came to my mind in terms of like the benefits of actually engaging the smaller creators, and this is something that we've discovered along the way while working with the gaming companies, is it's not always about the promotion, but you can also set campaigns and get the feedback from the creators. So,
Yes.
for example, if your game
Absolutely.
is not yet live, but you're interested in getting feedback, small creators are super good.
Yeah.
They're super, um, how do you say that? They're expressing their thoughts in such a way that it's just like super helpful for the gaming companies.
I
And
completely agree. Yeah. I
that's
mean, I was actually
one of the features that we also added, and it's been a blast.
No, I completely agree with that. I mean, we didn't specifically reach out in that particular way, but we did get some great feedback in that particular, from players about, oh, I discovered this, or I saw that particular bug, or I saw this particular thing. But what I think was really fascinating is the way they come across when they talk about how it works for their audiences. I think,
Hmm.
particularly right now, I mean, most of us who are making games haven't got the time to learn what it takes to make the game look great for a third party. We might have some ideas, but we're not going to have the level of insight. Because there's a whole bunch of things around tension, about setup, about payoff that has to happen visually, which happens to work well for making the game feel good, but works even better when the audience watching them play can get that sense of tension. I often think a bit like commentary. If you think about
Hmm.
a sports game, if there's no space for the commentary, you don't build the tension, and therefore you don't get as engaged. So the sports that are incredibly powerful are the one where there's plenty of time for the commentators to set your expectation, for your expectations to be thwarted or to be dramatically overreached. And I think having that kind of view, that perspective on your game, I think that's massively valuable.
I've been sitting close to the game developer who launched a campaign on our platform, and he was
Mm,
watching those highlights from the live streams on Twitch,
mm, mm.
and he was just glued to the screen and catching like every word that the streamer had to say about the game, and he was just
Yeah,
noting everything down because it was just eye-opening for him. He's like, "Whoa, I didn't think about that. Oh, this I should have thought about it, but now I can see like how to make it better." Just like 1 hour of stream, and he discovered so many things that he needed to work on.
I,
Um,
I think
so
that's exactly right. I mean, like you say, I think the thinking about this experience that we're doing, we yes, we're going to market the game, but actually part of that is engaging the community. Part of that is building the community, the first place to engage, but also understanding the material that we're making has to work for that community. And if you can shortcut that by working with micro influencers, what I find really interesting about that in particular is you're not burning the audience. Quite the opposite. If I do a large scale ad campaign, people come in, they play the game, they don't like it. I've just burnt that audience. But
mhm,
if I reach out to a dozen, micro influencers, and I talk to them, and I communicate with them, and I get their feedback, and I then tell them I've listened to their feedback and show them what I did having listened to their feedback, whether or not I
exactly.
agreed with it, that's not a burnt audience. That's one
That's
that
an
wants to do
engaged
more.
audience.
Yeah, exactly.
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 That's a good pathway to start building your community. It's not even by
Exactly.
asking influencers to play and promote your game, but like getting feedback about your game while streaming it. And their attitude and approach is totally different. And then they're there to help you. They're suddenly
Yeah.
not promoting the game or have this like monetarily incentive, but they're there to help you find the glitches and to
Yeah.
help you make your game better. But also kind of like promoting it in a way to their community.
I think this is fascinating for me because so normally I get there's lots of value in like esport level, the revenue models that go with that towards the players. It makes a lot of sense to me. But when you start talking about general players and pay 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 to play, so as in when you are earning by playing, I find that generally that diminishes the player experience for a lot of people. Not everybody, obviously. Highly skilled people, should get paid for showing off their skill. However, where we mix money and play, we end up creating work. Essentially, psychologically, once you start getting earning money, you're now working. Now, I think this is different in an influencer space because the influencer is doing the thing that they love because they love it, but they also know they need to pay the bills. And I think we don't have the mixing of the metaphor when we're dealing with an influencer who is getting revenue. They still have space in that model to enjoy what they're doing as well. Is that fair? Am I making sense?
That's totally fair because if you speak to any influencer and you ask him like what is the most important thing in what you're doing, and 99% of the time they will say community, like the
Yeah,
people that are supporting me, that watch my streams or that engage with me, these are the most important, part of my professional activity or my hobby.
yeah,
So whenever you're trying to promote a game and you're paying ten times more than the market would pay, you would still find influencers who would not accept your offer because the
Yeah.
most important thing for them is the community. So they will never promote a game that they don't like or that they think is not a good fit for their community just to get the payment because they know that they're going to lose in long
Yeah.
term because part of their community is just gonna not gonna support them if they start promoting games that they don't like, genuinely
And
don't like.
equally, if you are the game, if your game is the game that's going to get their community excited, if your game is going to be the one that's going to, they want to come back to watch again, then you've created a really positive cycle as well. So I think it goes both ways. It's like the passion, the opportunity that comes from an influencer that finds your game as their vehicle to increase their audience. Amazing. That's truly
Yeah,
amazing.
so it's kind of like work both ways. So first the influencer has to make a decision whether he thinks the game is a good fit for them and their community, and then you can also make a decision whether it's a
Mm,
good fit for you. So
mm.
it's always like a mutual acceptance. At least that's the way it's structured on our platform.
Yeah, completely agree. And like I say, you know, uh, having had experience using your platform and others, I think the whole principle of engaging with micro influence is incredibly important, and getting that, thinking about where it fits in the whole life cycle of your game, from the early stages where you're still working out what that game is going to be, to the preparation for launch, the building of the community through that process, all the way through to actually maximizing your conversions and getting people to actually start spending money in this experience, whether it's a pay up front or in pay in game, doesn't matter. Actually having a commercial game, if you're not paying attention to all of the audiences, you're missing a huge opportunity, in my opinion. on
I
that
totally
note
agree. Huh.
on that note, is there any last thing you'd like to sort of get people to think about when it comes to what techniques or tricks, or tricks that sounds mean, I don't mean tricks in a nasty way, I mean the kind of, what's the kind of smart stuff that you think more developers should think about when they're engaging with micro influencers?
That's a good question. What we've seen with a lot of, or let's say with some of the game developers that have been running campaigns with us, is that sometimes they have a certain budget, but they don't have a goal in mind. So they're like, oh, this is a new platform. We like, what's the minimum budget we can spend to test it out? That's like the first question that they
I
ask.
think
And at
that's the
this point, I
first question I
understand.
asked you.
Yeah, it's like how much money can we spend to get something? And in my opinion, that's not the best approach to using and utilizing whatever platform you're using, because you have to start off with, okay, where my game is at? Like, which is it a pre-launch or a post-launch stage? What am I trying to achieve here? Am I trying to build long-term relationship with influencers? Am I trying to get feedback about the game? Am I trying to get that, like, boost this team wish list? Like, what is your end goal and why is this your end goal? And based on that, I think like you'll find a lot of answers while using our platform or any other platform. And the functionality, you'll just see like, oh, okay, this is my goal, then I would should probably stick with this. And we also try to provide like recommendations in terms of the budgets, how much money you actually have to spend in order to get some meaningful results. Of course, you can go higher or you can go lower. But again, if you're spending, let's say, $250 on a micro influencer campaign, like don't expect to get major results because $250, for example, is not a lot of money these days. It's like if you go to a restaurant, you'd probably spend you know, go two or three times to a restaurant. That's the budget. So don't expect hundreds of influencers create content for you with that kind of budget. But then again,
Yeah.
it comes down to the goal. You can utilize $250 to get an amazing like feedback from like let's say 10 or 15 influencers that will boost the sales of your game in the long run because you're
Yeah.
like fixing some of those issues. So again, it depends on your goals. So start with that. That's mine.
Yeah. I think
advice.
that's fair. I mean, I think having realistic goals. So we did start by spending small amounts of money, but the reason we did that was because we're trying to test what works. So we're not expecting massive results. We're expecting results in proportion. We do exactly the same when it comes to test marketing on Meta or
Hmm.
on Google Ads. It's like, what is the smallest amount we can spend to check the state that the game is currently in terms of like its attractiveness to an audience. So I think there's still value in doing that, but like you say, you're not going to turn around and suddenly get millions of people downloading your game. And in fact, in some ways, you don't want to. I know it sounds odd. You actually, at that stage, if you're still testing the game, part of what you're doing is just to make sure that you're heading on the right lines before you drop the larger budgets.
Hmm.
And it is tricky if you're a small indie team and you don't have any marketing budget and you're just spending your what spare cash you have at the end of the week. But that's also part of the context of being an indie developer, eating ramen and doing your best, which is
Hmm.
always challenging, shall we say? Always challenging. Anyway, on that note, thank you very much. That's been great. Obviously, we've been enjoying talking about micro influencers and obviously the role that you guys play through the platform of DropeMe. Do you where should people look to get hold of you? Do you have a social media account of choice?
Yeah, I'm on Discord, I'm on LinkedIn, and I'll share the information with you, so maybe you can post it in the description as well. I'm happy to chat with all of you guys who are looking to tap into that channel, which is
Sounds
super
great.
important one these days. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Oscar,
And
for having me. It was a
oh,
pleasure.
it's a pleasure. And like I say, I have to own up to my bias because I have successfully used you, and it's been good for us. And like I say, there are other systems out there, so hopefully we're walking that fine line of these things. So I've been Oscar Clark. I have been your host for the Game Dev London podcast. Thank you very much for joining us, and thanks again to Dima for joining us and talking about the role of micro influencers. Hope you've gained something from that, at least in your thinking about how you might approach using the content creator audience as a way to communicate and also to understand how successful your game might be by engaging with them early. I think that's a really important aspect of what we've been talking about today. Thank you very much. If you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe in all those usual places, and don't forget we also have the Game Dev London Discord, so you please feel free to come down and join that and ask us whatever burning questions have arisen from here. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye and thank you very much.